Hi guys, I'm posting two videos. This is the first of the two on how to get through the data cleaning assignment for this class. This is for CIS 370 and 410. Okay, so for this assignment, I'm going to take you through a typical process of cleaning data before you would do an analysis. And we do have a simple analysis that we're going to do as part of this project as well. The data that you're going to see here is similar to what you might work with if you were working with, say, performance or survey data, maybe as a HR analyst or something like that. So I'm going to show you the two data sets first. On Moodle, I've posted this Word document, which, outlines the 9 steps that you need to go through to complete this assignment. This first video covers steps 1 through 7, and then the second video covers steps 8 and 9. So this is on Moodle, and then you'll also see 2 Excel files on Moodle, those being performance data and survey data. So step 1 here, anytime you're working with a data set for any reason, you want to make sure that you understand the data in the data set. So a lot of times this requires a conversation with your manager or whoever it is that is most familiar with that data set. So in this case, I'm going to explain the variables to you. That will cover step number 1. Make sure you understand the variables included and also the scales used to capture each variable. Okay, so let's go to our performance data first. So let's pretend this is performance data from employees at your company. This includes the employee's last name, and this includes the employee's first name. So that's your first 2 columns. Every row is a separate employee. The third column, that's that employee's manager's ID number. The fourth column here says master's disease state knowledge. That is a performance competency. So these 3 columns, D, E, and F, those are all performance competencies that these employees were rated on by their managers. So we have master's disease state knowledge. That's the first performance competency. Manages business complexity. That's another competency. And then sets direction and strategy. That's the third competency. So like I said, you need to understand the scales that these variables, these competencies were captured on. So one way to do that is to figure out what were all of the options underneath here. An easy way to do that is to add a filter. Let's add a filter to all of these. The way I'm going to do that, I'm highlighting the first row all the way at the top, which is basically the name of each variable. And I'm going to go to Data and Filter. Now, whenever you open up one of these filters, you can expand it this way. You're going to see every possible response option to that variable, so in that column. So you can see here, we have effective, we have ineffective, we have neither effective nor effective, somewhat ineffective, very effective, and very ineffective. And then we have some blank data. So that's the scale. So this was rated on a, 7-point effectiveness scale. So were the other 2 competencies as well. And in the last column, column G, is sales. So this is how much, the total sales of each of these employees. So these must be sales employees. Okay, so that's our first data set. That's our performance data. Our second data set that we're going to be working with for this project is survey data. So in this data set, there's a lot of data that we probably won't need. This is kind of what data would look like if you would use a very commonly used survey platform called Qualtrics. And it gives you a lot of junk columns that really aren't useful for you. So in column A, we have the employee's email. In column B, we have status, which it doesn't look like there's anything useful in that column. It just says IP address. Column C, And then column C is the IP address for each of these employees, which could be confidential information. So that's definitely something that we would want to remove from this data set. Progress, it doesn't look like there's anything useful underneath this column. Duration in seconds is column E, so that's how long it took them to complete the survey. Column F, finished, as you see, it looks like they're all true. So that's just saying if they finished the survey or not. Column G is what department do they work in. As you can see in this column, there are a lot of typos, and you may have the same information typed in 2 different ways, which will pose a problem if we want to do some type of analysis or group breakdown. So that's something that we're going to have to clean up. Column H, I, J, and K. These look like these were different engagement questions on the survey. So it looks like there were 4 engagement survey questions there. Then L is satisfaction and commitment survey question, as was column M, column N, and column O. Column P was a satisfaction with manager survey question. So, basically, how satisfied were you with your manager? They asked that question in 4 different ways. So those are captured from columns P, Q, R, and S. These are all survey questions, by the way. Columns T, U, V, and W all say career development opportunities. So that was the first question related to career development opportunities. And then the second is column U, third is column V, fourth is column W, and that's the end of this data. Okay, so now you should feel pretty familiar with what the data sets are, what the variables are. Oh, and we didn't talk about the scales included for the survey questions. Let's go back to these survey questions. So you can see here, these were rated on a 7-point scale. So again, if you want to add the filters, if you want to highlight all of these, the labels at the top of all of these columns, you can just hover over the 1, as you see on the left-hand side of the screen, until you see that black arrow and click, and that will automatically highlight them. We're going to go to Data and Filter. Now we can look here to see what were all of the possible options for the survey questions, and it's a 7-point scale. Okay. So we've finished step 1. Let's move on to step 2. So sometimes it's useful to rename the column labels, our variable names. So sometimes these are just too long to read without expanding the columns. So you can expand the column this way to see the entire title, or you can click on the cell and see the title up here. But sometimes it's useful just to shorten some of these columns. So for instance, what department do you work in here? I would just change that to department, an abbreviation for department. For engagement, question 1, you might want to just rename that to ENG1, and then ENG2, ENG3, ENG4. So it's really easy just to scan across these. With satisfaction, as you can see, the first 4 are satisfaction and commitment related questions, and then the next 4 are satisfaction with manager related questions. So it'd be much easier to differentiate the 2 if we could do like S and C1, S and C2, S and C3, S and C4, and then satisfaction with manager we could call S and M. And there's no right name for these. You can choose your own abbreviation, whatever makes most sense to you. And then we have our career development opportunities. So I'm going to say CDO1, CDO2, CDO3, CDO4. Okay, so we've renamed our important columns in this data set. I'm going to go over to the performance data set and rename those columns as well. Last name and first name and manager ID are okay. Master's disease state knowledge. We can change master's disease state knowledge. And let's remember this is performance, a performance competency. So you might want to do something like performance. Manages business complexity. Sets direction and strategy. And then sales is good. Okay. So as you see, both of these sheets of data are in two different Excel files. One thing that could make all of this a little easier to work with moving forward is to get both of these sheets in one file. We're going to merge these two sheets such that we have just one sheet with each employee's performance data and survey data in each row. And that's going to be much easier to do if we have both of these sheets in one file. So let's copy this sheet. So we're going to copy. And we're going to move it. So what I just did, I just went down to this sheet, right click, move or copy. To book. Okay, we want to move this to the survey data book. And we're just going to move it to the end. And do OK. So now in our survey data book, you'll see we have the survey data here and the performance data here. Now we can, oh wait, I think it already shut out my performance data, so that's perfect. I was going to say if your performance Excel file is still open, close it out now. You don't need it anymore since all of that data is in this sheet, but it looks like it automatically closed out. One thing you should do is rename these sheets. If you just double click here, it should turn gray and you can backspace and call this performance data. And then sheet 1 was survey data. So double click on that and rename that survey data. Okay, I'm kind of jumping ahead, but we renamed the column labels. So I'm going to bolden that. Next, it says delete columns that aren't needed in the final data set. So let's go over back to our survey data. We don't need IP address, status IP address, progress, or duration, or finished. I'm going to delete all of this. This is just junk data that's automatically downloaded whenever you download survey data. It's not anything useful for the purposes of this project. So we are going to delete that. There's no reason to have distracting junk data in your data set. Okay, and then in our performance data, we need all of this. So I'm not going to delete anything here. Actually, I'm not sure if we need manager ID, but let's just leave it for now. If you're ever not sure, leave it. Or what you can do, and I would recommend doing this throughout any data analysis project, save different versions. So before you delete anything, save a version 1. Once you start deleting stuff, save a second version. As you make more changes, save a third version. It's always a good idea to have more than one version so that you don't lose anything. Or if you make some kind of mistake, you can backtrack to a previous version before you made the mistake. That happens a lot in this class, so that's highly recommended. Okay, so we deleted the columns that aren't needed in the final data set. So now we're going to check for missing data and delete if needed. So sometimes you'll have someone end up in a data set and you'll have no data for them. So there's no point in them being included in the data set, 1. And 2, sometimes if you have missing data, depending on what you're using to run the analysis, you could have some hangups. So for instance, there are certain analyses that you could run in Excel, certain statistical tests. If you have any blank data, the test will not run. So we need to check for blank data. So what we're going to do, there's an easy way to do that. We're going to open up the filters for each column. If you scroll all the way down to the bottom, if there are any blanks, you would see a box down here that would say blanks. So what you could do, And let's find one where that has that. So let's see for department. Let's see if we have any blanks. We do have blanks for department. So if you click this select all, that unselects all. And I'm just going to choose blanks, and we're going to see what's going on with these people. Okay, so for these people, we don't have their department. So their department is all blank. But we do have some useful data for them. So I'm not going to delete them from the whole data sheet. But, we just don't have department information on them. So if we did any kind of analysis that involves department, they wouldn't be included in it. So we're going to clear out the filter, get everyone back by choosing clear filter. Let's go to engagement. So here, let's see if we have any blanks. We do. So let's pull up these blanks. We have 3 people with no data, no survey data whatsoever. We cannot do anything with these people because we have no survey data. So there's no point in us having them in here. So we're going to delete them. So you can either go individually, hover over this whole row, 269 until you see the black arrow, and you can right click and then delete row. Or you can hover and then press shift or control to capture both of these rows. Right click, delete row. So these people are gone now. So let's clear filter, and now we should have no blanks for that. So check through all of these and make sure that you have no blanks. So I'm going to let you pause this video and do that. Check for blanks for all of these. If there are blanks, you want to make sure that all of the data for that person is missing. So if they're only missing some data for some survey questions, keep them in there because we have some useful data. For instance, this person right here. We have a blank here, but we have all of this other useful data, so I'm not going to delete them from the analysis. Only delete them if all of their data is missing. Let's go to performance data now. Let's see if we're missing any, first of all, any names. Nothing missing there. I'm not so worried about manager ID, but let's make sure we have some performance data for everyone. So there are blanks for this first competency. So let's unselect all and then select blanks and see what's going on with those people. Okay, so we have no competency information for them, but we do have sales performance information. So I'm not going to delete them from the data set. They'll be included in the sales analysis, but not in the performance competencies analysis. So let's clear out that filter. Well, let's see if we have any blanks for sales. No, we have no blanks in sales. So it looks like we're good to go for this sheet. You'll just need to go through the survey data and make sure there's no one else in here that has all missing data. So we went through step 4, so I'm going to bolden that. Step 5, we are going to recode all scale responses that are in text form. So let's go to our data. So sometimes you'll have data that's in text form that you need to be in numerical form. So anything that has been rated on some kind of scale really should be changed to numerical form in order to do certain types of analyses. So say that we wanted to run a correlation between one of these, say, engagement survey questions and sales to see if engagement is correlated with actually, let me use one of these as an example. Master's disease state knowledge is performance competency. If we wanted to look at the correlation between this and that engagement question, both of these would need to be in numerical format. We cannot run a correlation with text. So what we need to do, we need to change all of these responses to numbers. In the survey data, we don't need to do that because all of these survey questions are already numbers. So that's not so much of an issue. In the performance data, though, we need to recode these three. Okay, so the first thing that we need to do, we need to keep track of what are our scale response options for these performance competencies and how are we recoding them. So I'm going to create a little index. So I'm going to create a new sheet by clicking on this cross with the circle around it at the bottom. This is going to be our index. I'm just going to call it index. These are going to be our performance competency responses, we'll say. And I can't spell performance, apparently. This is going to be how we recoded. Okay, so remember here, this was an effectiveness scale. We need to put all of these responses in that index, and we need to order them from greatest to least. So if you read through these, what's going to be the greatest response, the highest level of effectiveness? Well, that's going to be very effective. So that should get a 7. What's the lowest level of effectiveness? Well, you should see very ineffective. So that's going to get a 1. So let's go back to our index and go ahead and do that. So what we're going to do, we're going to have 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The 1, like we just said, is very ineffective. The 7 is very effective. So what should come after very effective? What's the second to best? Well, if you read through these, somewhat effective is a little lower than effective. So I would say effective should get the 6, and then somewhat effective should get the 5. So effective is getting the 6. Somewhat effective is getting the 5, and we're going to do the opposite here. So ineffective is getting the 2. Somewhat ineffective is getting the 3, and then the 4 is going to get whatever was right in the middle, which was neither effective nor ineffective. So sometimes it's a good idea, most of the time it's a good idea to just copy and paste from these cells so there's no human error. So neither effective nor ineffective is the middle rating. So I'm just going to copy that, Control C, go to index and paste here, Control V. So now we need to recode each of those to these ratings. Okay, so first we're going to go with very effective. Let's go to our performance data. We're going to recode all of the very effectives to a 7. Sounds like a lot of work, but it's really not. So let's see. There are several different ways to do this. And keep in mind that with a lot of this data cleaning work in Excel, there are many ways to accomplish this. But I'm showing you the way that I think would be the quickest. If you have any other ways, feel free to try them out. I'm going to do Control F. Control F will bring up the find and replace box. There is another place to get the find and replace box, which I'm trying to recall where it is. If you go to the Home tab, you can do find and select, and then go to replace. What we want to find is very effective, and we want to replace it with a 7. Okay, one thing to note here, I want you to open up options and choose match entire cell contents. The reason for doing this is because once we get to effective and we recode it to 7, it's going to take any place where effective we're recoding to 6. if we did that without choosing match entire cell contents, it's going to take every word effective that it finds in here and recode it to a 6. That's a problem because we have somewhat effective in there that needs to be a 5, and it would recode it to somewhat 6 if we had recoded effective to 6 without checking this box. So you need to check this box here. Okay, so let's do replace all for recoding very effective to a 7. And ta-da, made 118 replacements. All of our very effectives are now 7. So now we're going to change effective to a 6. Oop. And replace all. And then we're going to change somewhat effective. Always go back to your index if you don't remember what should be recoded to what. And then we had neither ineffective nor effective was a 4. Okay, I can't find anything. So what do you think is the problem here? I typed in something incorrectly. So this is whenever you need to go and copy directly from the cell because you made some kind of typo. So I'm copying this, Control F to bring this back up, replace. My computer is not cooperating today. And I'm just gonna Control V, paste that there, and do replace all. Success. Okay, so now a 3 would be somewhat ineffective. Replace all. And then a 2 was ineffective. And a 1 was very ineffective. And there we go. Now we have all of our text responses recoded to numbers. So let's go back into here. And we kept track of our codes in a separate sheet, so we did all of this. Okay, 2 steps left for this video. So 6 is correct typos for columns with open text responses. Okay, so if we go back to our survey data, it's very clear that in this marketing column here, this was open text. So the question was just, what department do you work in? Blank. And they had to type in what department they worked in. Anytime that you give that type of question, you're going to have a lot of typos. So that was a flaw with this survey. That should have been a multiple choice question in this survey so that you wouldn't deal with these typos. But it's not a perfect world, so sometimes you do have to deal with this. So we're going to use filters to figure out how to clean all this up. So we're going to use this filter. I'm going to start, there are a few ways you can do this as well, but I'm going to start with, let's say, marketing, and I'm just going to type in M-A-R-K and enter, and that's going to pull up everything that starts with M-A-R-K. So these are all of our marketing responses. In the first cell at the top, I'm going to type it in the correct way. Then I'm going to hover over the bottom right corner of the box until you see this black cross, and I'm going to drag it down. That's going to copy what's in that first cell into all the other cells. So now they all look the same. Okay, let's clear marketing. Next, we could do production. So let's type in PRO, even though that only brings up the lowercase p's. Another way we could do this is unchecking select all and then go through these and check anything that looks like it should be production. So it is just those 2 options. Okay, so now I'm going to type production in the way I want it to look. And then I'm going to drag this down to copy that into all these other responses. Now you just want to be diligent that you're not changing anyone's response to something that's incorrect. Okay, next here, we could go with finance next. So let's choose the two finances. And this first one looks just how I want it to look, so I don't need to retype it. I'm going to drag this down. So all the finances look the same. It's important that we do this because whenever we do any kind of breakout, if for instance, if we want to build a pivot table and pull in data from everyone who was in finance, we're going to be able to do that now. If finance looked like 3 different words, then our pivot table would have 3 different finance groups whenever they really should all be the same group. So that's why it's important that we have these clear categories. Okay, HR. We have HR, human resource, human resources. Let's just go with HR. Capital HR. I'm going to drag this down. Okay, and then we have R&D, which is research and development. It helps if you're familiar with the departments at your company so that you know what any acronyms stand for. So let's just go with capital R&D. And we should be getting pretty close to the end. Purchasing is the last one. So we have these 3 that look like they should all be purchasing. So purchasing, drag this down, and then we should be good to go. So let's clear out this filter and just verify, opening up the filter, that we have only one of each department included in here. So that looks correct. Okay, so that's what we needed to do for 6. So now we are on the 7th step. So this is the most complex step probably for this assignment, maybe other than step 9, but I think this is probably it. We need to merge our 2 data sets. We're going to do that using a few different types of formulas. So why are we doing this? If we want to run some kind of analysis looking at employees' survey responses and their performance levels, the data has to be set up a certain way in order to do this. So we need each employee's survey responses and performance data in each column. So our performance data is going to have to be over here. We would not be able to run many types of analyses that we would want to do to see if there's a relationship between, say, engagement, survey questions, and performance. We wouldn't be able to do that without having all of this data organized in each employee's row. So that's the purpose of this. Okay. Some people might think, oh, well, we can just copy and paste all of this data into here. Well, that's usually not, sometimes that can happen, but if you have any employees missing from a data set or different groups of employees in different data sets, that's not going to work out because you could be copying and pasting data into different people's names. So we're going to use a VLOOKUP. A VLOOKUP is going to bring in data for starting with Pamela Verbeist, bring in her data from the performance data set into this data set. In order to do that, we need a common ID for each of these employees. So sometimes you'll have the employee's, say, ID number or maybe their email address in both sheets, both data sets, but sometimes that's not the case. For this project, that's not the case. So we have email for survey data. Performance data, we have first name and last name. We don't have their email. Luckily, their email address is their first name dot last name at xyzcompany.com. So what we need to do, we need to figure out how we're going to create a common ID for each of these people across the data sets. What we're going to do, since we have first name and last name in each data set, just in different formats, we're going to create a common format that's first name, period, last name. We're going to start here. So there's a simple way to remove at xyzcompany.com from each of these cells. That's what we're going to do. That way we'll just have first name dot last name. So this is how I want you to do this. So we are going to insert a column here. I'm actually going to insert another column. If you ever want to redo something that you just did, you can click Control Y. Okay, so what we're going to do, we're going to go to Data, and we're going to use Text to Columns. So I'm going to highlight this whole column A. So I'm hovering over column A. When you see the black arrow, click, and that highlights the whole column. I'm going to choose Text to Columns. Text to Columns will separate the text in one cell or one column into multiple columns. What we want to do, we want to separate first name dot last name from xyzcompany.com. I'm going to choose Next here. And then this is telling you what we're going to separate it by. So we want to separate it by the @ sign. So you can look here, data preview. This is showing you what it's going to look like. So since we are separating the text into multiple columns using the @ sign, we're going to have first name dot last name in this column. And then in the second column, column B, you'll see xyzcompany.com. Once we have that, then we can just delete column B and we'll have our first name dot last name ID. So let's do finish. And that's what we have. So let's delete B, and we actually didn't need to create another column C. Let's just delete both of those. And now we have the ID that we want. Okay, so this is going to be our ID. I'm going to rename that to ID. Now we want the same ID for our performance data. That way we can match up the employees' data. First, what we need to take our first name and move it on the right side of last name. We're going to use a function called concatenate where you can take, you're kind of doing the opposite of what we just did. You're taking text or numbers or whatever that's in multiple cells and you're combining it into one cell. So we want 3 cells. We want the first to be first name. We want the second to be a period, and we want the third to be last name. We need to have 3 columns like that in that order. So let's move our first name. We're going to cut and move it in front of last name. Okay, so now we have first name, last name. We need a period in between first and last name. So I'm going to insert a column here, and I'm just going to put a period in that one. I'm going to hover over the bottom right corner of the cell, double click, and that's going to copy and paste the period into all of these other cells. Sometimes this gets finicky, so I always like to scroll down and make sure that this actually worked. If you don't have any filters set, it should work just perfectly like it did. But if you do have filters set, it can cause problems. Okay, we're going to add a column before column D. So hover over column D, insert. This is where we're going to concatenate first name dot last name. So this will be our ID variable. So this is how I want you to do this. Equal sign, start typing in concat, and you'll see concatenate pop up. Double click on concatenate. We want to concatenate Pamela, comma, this cell, comma, this cell. Close parentheses, enter. So here we go. That's our ID. Now again, hover here until you see the black cross, double click, and that should carry through. Okay, one thing you're going to need to do, don't unclick out of this. Right now, Excel is reading each of these cells under column D as a formula that's pulling information from other columns. We want to remove the formula and just keep the text in here so our VLOOKUP will work properly. There's a way to do that that's really easy. We're basically going to copy and paste a special way over these cells. So you're going to right click, copy, right click, paste 1, 2, 3. That removes the formula that we just developed, and it just keeps the text that the formula pulled in. So now this is our ID here. And now we don't need columns A through C anymore. If you don't copy and paste over the data, you cannot delete A, B, and C columns without your ID getting screwed up. Okay, so now we have our common ID. So now for the VLOOKUPs. Okay, so the smart thing to do when we want to merge this, we're going to VLOOKUP the performance data into this sheet. We are not going to do that the other way around because then we would be pulling 20 we'd be doing 20 VLOOKUPs for all of these survey questions. Whereas for our performance data, we only need to do 4 VLOOKUPs because we only have 4 performance columns. The first thing we're going to do is in our survey data, we need to say where we want the performance data to go. When you're using a VLOOKUP, it's easier to keep things closer to the ID variable, so I'm going to put the performance data in front of the survey data. So I'm hovering over C, right-click, insert, and that's going to add this column. I'm going to do Control Y to add a second column, Control Y again, and Control Y again. This is going to be our columns for our 4 performance variables. So let's go to our performance data and just copy the names here and paste them here. That's what's going to go here. Now for the VLOOKUP time. So I'm going to show you how to do the VLOOKUPs for this and this, and then I want you to do the VLOOKUPs for this and this. So starting with master's disease state knowledge. Okay, so to do a VLOOKUP, you're going to do equal, start typing in VLOOKUP, and then double click. Okay, so first, look at what you see popping up here. So you see lookup value first. Lookup value, that's the ID variable. So we need to tell Excel what variable to use as a common ID. That would be Pamela Verbeist. Make sure you're clicking just on that cell and not the whole column. So we want Excel to look up this person in the other data sheet. We're going to do column. Okay, what's the other data sheet? So that's table array. We need to tell it where is Pamela Verbeist data. So we're going to go to performance data here. We need to hover over column A, which has Pamela Verbeist. And then we need to go over to the data that we want to pull in, which was master's disease state knowledge performance competency. Now just click comma. You can still see the VLOOKUP formula up here. Don't ever click out of it. What you need to see next is column index number. So that number needs to be the number of columns from your ID variable to the variable that you want to pull in. including those 2 columns. So in this circumstance, it would be 3. So we had 3 columns from ID to master's disease state knowledge. So that's why I typed in a 3 there. And then you're going to click comma and true. You're going to put in true or false. We only want an exact match. So we're going to choose false and then close parentheses, enter. And now it pulled in 7. We can double click the black cross and that's going to copy that formula for every single person. And again, you might want to copy and paste over the formula so you can manipulate the data and not worry about anything getting messed up here. So all of these cells right here, Excel is actually reading as a formula. Let's copy and paste 1, 2, 3. The formulas are no longer there. So now if we wanted to, we could delete this data and not have to worry about our formulas getting messed up. Let's do one more. So this is for manages business complexity, MBC. We're going to do equal VLOOKUP, double click on the VLOOKUP, lookup value. So that's our ID. We're going to click just that cell. Comma, table array, where is the data? So we're going to performance data. We need to highlight ID through whatever we want to pull in, MBC in this case. Comma, there were 4 columns from ID to the data we want to pull in, so we're going to put in a 4, and then we're going to put in false, close parentheses. And there we go. So let's copy this all the way down and then copy and paste over the formulas. So copy, paste 1, 2, 3. Okay, I want you to replicate that process for these 2. Then if you're copying and pasting over the formulas, you can delete this performance data sheet because you don't need it anymore. Okay, so we finished this. Okay, so now in the second video, I'm going to cover steps 8 and 9.